Greetings, humans of the internet. Welcome once again to Bowtie Talks. I, of course, am your excellent host, Luke Johnson, coming to you from my undisclosed location in Midwest USA once again. And welcome to part two of what I'm hoping will be a three-part series on the history of some key elements of the American West. Well, key elements and key people of the American West, I should say. Which brings us to the topic for this day, which is the Oregon Trail. And if you're wondering what brought this episode on, besides the obvious theme, of the themes of the American West, one thing that millennials and even some early Gen Zers like myself have in common, a significant portion of us probably grew up playing the Oregon Trail video game on the computer. I spent many happy hours with my sister, Carly. Shout out, Carly. She was on another episode with me. Anyway, I spent many happy hours with her playing that very game. We actually had a modern updated version, not the pixelated one that came out in the 80s. And half the time, our entire party died of dysentery. But anyway, I died of the Oregon Trail and some of the people who happened to travel it. So, as some pioneer man said during the 1800s, on to Oregon. Now, during the 1840s, the Manifest Destiny had Americans in the East eager to expand their horizons. As we talked about before with the Lewis and Clark expedition, were the first people to forge a path across the Continental Divide. But truly, we have missionaries to thank for the Oregon Trail. Beginning in 1834, a man named Nathaniel Wyeth led the first religious group, and he brought along traders and naturalists west to what is now Idaho, where they built an outpost. This led to a man named Marcus Whitman, who was determined to spread Christianity to the Native Americans on the frontier, and so he set forth on horseback from the Northeast in 1835 to prove that the westward trail to Oregon could be traveled safely and further than ever before. Whitman's first attempt took him to the Green River Rendezvous, which was a meeting place for fur trappers and traders in the Rocky Mountains near what is now Wyoming. When Whitman returned to the Northeast, he married and once again set out to the west. This time he brought his young wife Narcissa and another Protestant missionary couple. The motley crew made it to the Green River Rendezvous, but then they faced a grueling journey along Native American trails across the Rocky Mountains using Hudson Bay Company. They finally reached Fort Vancouver, Washington, where they built missionary posts nearby. Whitman's post was at, okay, that's a word I'm afraid of mispronouncing, so instead, I'm just going to spell it Waiilatpu, amid the Cayuse natives. This small party proved that both men and women could travel west, albeit not easily. Narcissa Whitman's accounts of the journey were published in the East, and slowly more missionaries and settlers followed their path, which became known as the Whitman Mission Route. However, in 1842, the Whitman mission was closed by the American Missionary Board, and Whitman went back east on horseback. And in the meantime, a missionary by the name of Elijah White led over 100 pioneers across the Oregon Trail. And when Whitman headed west again, he met up with a huge wagon train bound for Oregon. The group included 120 wagons, about 1,000 people, and thousands of livestock. This started a domino effect of pioneer migrations along the Oregon Trail, and it became known as the Great Emigration, that's with an E, not an I, of 1843. When Whitman returned to the mission, his main goal shifted from killers. And as more and more settlers arrived, the local tribes resisted any chances to get to know the settlers better. And after a measles epidemic broke out in 1847, the Cayuse population was greatly diminished despite Whitman using his the ongoing conflict, Whitman, his wife, and some of the mission staff were killed. Many more were taken hostage for over a month. And this incident sparked a 7-year war between the Cayuse and the federal government. Now, for what life was like for the travelers, I'm happy to say that many of the people on the Oregon Trail kept journals. And planning a 5 month to a half a year trip across rugged terrain was definitely not an easy task, and sometimes could take up to a year just to prepare. People heading west had to sell their homes, businesses, and any possessions they couldn't take with them. They also had to purchase including flour, sugar, bacon, coffee, salt, rifles, and ammunition. And as anyone who's played the Oregon Trail video game knows, the most important item for a successful life on the Oregon Trail was the covered wagon. It had to be sturdy enough to withstand the elements, yet small and light enough for a team of oxen or mules to pull day after day. Most of the wagons were about 6 feet wide and 12 feet long. They were usually made of seasoned hardwood and covered with a large oiled canvas stretched over the wood frames, which was food supplies, the wagons were loaded with water barrels, tar buckets, an extra spike, and extra wheels and axles. However, contrary to popular belief, most of the wagons that journeyed on the Oregon Trail were prairie schooners and not the larger and heavier Conestoga wagons. And as for first-hand accounts of life on the trail, I'm happy to say that many of the pioneers kept journals. Like this entry from a 14-year-old named Mary Martha Wanless, who led her family across the plains. By the time they were able to continue their journey, they were so far behind they never did catch up with anyone. The three small children, the boy acted as the pilot. Day after day, they trudged over the country, meeting lawless men who had deserted both armies and were foraging for themselves. They pushed on until the last settlement was left behind, and nothing but a treeless and trackless wilderness lay before them. Marcus Whitman's wife, Narcissa. What couple names their daughter Narcissa? I mean, it sounds so close to narcissist. I mean, really, good lord. She probably thought a great deal of herself, though, that's for sure. Although maybe not, considering she was a Christian woman, she was probably very humble. In which case, that name is very ironic. But anyway, Narcissa Whitman stated in her journal, "In the morning, as soon as the day breaks, the first that we hear is the words, 'Arise, arise.' Then the mules set up such a noise as you've never heard, which puts the whole camp in motion. Girls, how do you think we managed to rest seat or sofa on which to recline? Perhaps you think we always encamp in the shade of some thick wood. Such a sight I have not seen, lo, these many weeks." And in regards to other aspects of life, a typical day started before daybreak with breakfast of coffee, bacon, and dry bread. Then the bedding was secured and the wagon was replaced in time to get underway by 7 o'clock. Then at noon they stopped for a cold meal of coffee, beans, and bacon, and then back on the road. Around 5 in the afternoon, after traveling an average of 15 miles, they circled the wagons for an evening. The men secured the animals and made repairs while women cooked a hot meal of hot tea and boiled rice with dried beef or codfish. Activities during the evening including schooling the children, singing and dancing, and telling stories around the campfire. And some trains insisted on stopping every Sunday, while others reserved only Sunday morning for religious activities and pushed on during the afternoon. Resting on Sundays, in addition to giving the oxen and other animals a needed break, also gave the women of the wagon train a chance to tend to their domestic chores, particularly doing laundry, as I'm sure you can imagine, dust along the trail was definitely prevalent. And occasionally, a wagon train's arrival at a source of clean water was enough to prompt a stopover for laundry day. And of course, sometimes they get attached to each other. Marriages and births were always special occasions, and there were a surprising number of both on the Oregon Trail. Weddings usually happened at either jumping off spots or for those romances that bloomed along the trail on the Platte River or at Fort Laramie. And interestingly, almost every wagon train had expectant mothers. And when babies were born on the trail, sometimes they were named after actual features, events, or I just can't imagine a child named Rock. Well, maybe Rocky or something along those lines, but no, or maybe there might have been some little girls named Laramie after the river. And of course, with all those marriages and births, and naturally there had to have been some deaths that occurred on the Oregon Trail as well, as anyone who's ever played the Oregon Trail computer game can tell you. Many families faced deaths due to sickness, starvation, harsh weather conditions, and travel accidents were common and took their toll. And as any player of the Oregon Trail video game can tell you, dysentery. And when these people died, funerals were held, but there wasn't any wood for coffins. The graves were dug, and the dead were simply stuck into graves and buried, obviously. And when push came to shove, nearly 1 in 10 who set off on the However, the old saying goes, that which doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. And believe me, there was a lot to kill you on the Oregon Trail. Weather-related dangers included thunderstorms, lethally large hailstones, lightning, tornadoes, and high winds. And the intense heat of the desert caused the wood to shrink and wagon wheels had to be soaked in rivers at night to keep their iron rims from rolling right off during the day, deep and sometimes as fine as corn flour. Ox shoes fell and hooves split, and they had to be cured with hot tar. Lips blistered and split in the dry air, and their only remedy was to rub axle grease on their lips. River crossings were also often dangerous. Even if the current was slow and the water was shallow, wagon wheels could be damaged by unseen rocks or become mired in the muddy bottom. Kind of sounds like the name of a blues singer. Please welcome Muddy bottom! People often had to walk most of the trail. It was 15 miles a day, and it was almost always on foot. Contrary to popular perception, most pioneers did not actually ride in the covered wagons. Those were usually reserved strictly for supplies. Most of the Oregon Trail was walked, and walking all this time on foot did get to some people. One woman on the Oregon Trail named Elizabeth Markham was one such person. She went insane along the Snake River, announcing to her family that she was not proceeding any further. And so her husband was forced to take the wagons and children and leave her behind. Later, he sent their son back to retrieve her. When she returned on her own, her husband was informed that she clubbed their son to death with a rock. He raced back to her, and on his return, he found that his wife had taken that opportunity to set fire to one of the family's wagons. However, those that did make it all the way were rewarded. Only around 80,000 of the estimated 400,000 Oregon Trail immigrants actually reached Oregon. The majority of them splintered off in either Wyoming or Idaho, seeking their fortunes in California's gourd fields or the Mormon settlements in Utah. So what have we learned? Well, the Oregon Trail is much more than a historical route. It's definitely a testament to human spirit and determination. It shows that we Americans are a hardy bunch, and even in the face of adversity, we will not back down, which I find extremely inspiring, and I hope all of you listening do as well. Before we leave, I would like to thank OregonTrail.ws, the History.com, OCTA-trails.org, and digitalhistory.uh.edu for the wonderful information I was able to use to make this podcast. Thank you, goodbye, and God bless. Oh, also, one member of your party died of dysentery.